Picture a creature with four distinct faces, locked forever in four directions at once. A man, a lion, an ox, and an eagle, watching the entire horizon simultaneously, never once turning its body. Wings whose sound, when they moved, is compared to the roar of rushing waters and to the noise of an army on the march. Wheels covered in eyes that move alongside it without ever needing to turn a corner. This isn't a creature out of mythology, and it isn't something dreamed up for a movie. It's described in astonishing detail in one of the strangest books of the Old Testament. And today we're going to reconstruct exactly what one man saw with his own eyes beside an irrigation canal in Babylon 25 centuries ago. That man's name was Ezekiel. He was a priest, trained since youth to serve in the temple in Jerusalem, schooled in rituals that could only be carried out in one place, the house of God on the holy mountain. But in 597 BC, when Nebuchadnezzar carried King Jehoiakim off into captivity, along with thousands of nobles and priests, Ezekiel was torn out of that world and dragged to Babylon. There, beside the Kebar canal, among exiles who wondered whether God had abandoned them in a pagan land, he began his prophetic calling with the most extraordinary vision recorded anywhere in the Old Testament. Think about what it meant for a man like this to stop being a priest overnight. Ezekiel had spent his whole childhood training for one very specific job, offering sacrifices, telling the pure from the impure, guarding the smallest details of a worship system that only made sense within the temple walls. In Babylon, none of that mattered. There was no altar, no holy of holies, nothing left to sacrifice. He was, in practical terms, a priest with no temple, an expert in something that no longer existed for him. And it's exactly into that professional and spiritual void that heaven chose to step. The text itself places this experience on the 5th day of the 4th month of the 5th year of his exile, a level of precision that would have carried enormous weight for a priest raised on sacred calendars. Every date in the Jewish calendar was tied to festivals and cycles of temple service that Ezekiel could no longer fulfill. He was, in a sense, marking time for a service the exile had already stripped from him, and it was precisely into that emptiness that heaven decided to show him something no religious calendar had ever prepared him for. The text opens with a windstorm coming out of the north, a great cloud, and fire flashing back and forth with a glow like polished bronze at the center of the blaze. For the peoples of that region, the north wasn't just any direction. It was more often than not the point on the compass tied to military threats, to the invading armies that had historically come down on Israel from that side. The glory of God advancing from the north, carrying the same visual force as a storm of war, already sets the tone for everything that follows. This isn't a gentle, peaceful appearance. It's a display of absolute power. And out of the middle of that storm came 4 living creatures, each shaped like a man, but with 4 faces and 4 wings. Not a single face, shifting expression, but 4 separate faces, permanently fixed, each looking a different way at once, as if every creature were, at every moment, watching all points of the horizon without ever needing to move. The 4 faces were those of a man, a lion, an ox, and an eagle, and this combination isn't some decorative flourish. It's a complete theological statement about the reach of creation itself. The human face stands for humanity, made in God's image. The lion's face for wild animals, the ox for domestic animals and the everyday work of the fields, and the eagle for dominion over the skies. Together, these 4 faces cover every category of life that Genesis describes God as having created, as if these creatures summed up in their own bodies the entirety of the world surrounding the divine throne. Later, Jewish tradition noticed something else. Each face represents the highest-ranking member of its category. The lion, the mightiest of the wild animals. The ox, the strongest of the domestic ones. The eagle, the fastest of the birds. And the man, the pinnacle of all creation. Some ancient commentators went so far as to read these 4 faces as the entire book of Genesis, compressed into a single living body. All of creation, represented and present, standing guard around the throne of the one who made it. But the detail that really changes how you read this vision shows up almost in passing. These beings did not turn as they moved. Each one went straight ahead in whatever direction it faced. They never had to turn their bodies or expose a blind side to anything, because with four faces looking in four directions, moving toward any point in space simply meant moving forward. In a world where every move we make exposes a back, a blind spot, these creatures guarding God's throne are built so that there is never, ever an unwatched angle. Compare that to any human system of watchkeeping. A sentry on a Babylonian wall had to turn his head, and even then blind spots existed, moments when his back was exposed while his eyes checked the front. Even the most disciplined ancient armies, with their overlapping shield walls, depended on one soldier covering another's flank, because no human being, however well trained, could look in two directions at once, let alone four. Ezekiel's creatures eliminate that problem by design. There's no need for a watch rotation, because there's no angle left uncovered, and all four faces are always active, always present in all four directions at once. The text goes on to describe their straight legs, the soles of their feet like a calf's hoof, gleaming like polished bronze, and under their wings, human hands on all four sides. Their wings touched one another. Two covered the body and two stretched upward, touching the wings of the creature beside it, forming one coordinated motion, almost like a single organism made of four working parts, perfectly synchronized. Nowhere in the whole description is there a single isolated individual gesture. Every creature moves according to the other three, as if the unity of the whole mattered more than any one being's separate identity. When these creatures moved, the sound of their wings was like the roar of rushing waters, like the voice of the Almighty, like the noise of an army on the march. Not the soft flutter we sentimentally picture today when we think of an angel, but something closer to a waterfall's roar mixed with the synchronized footsteps of thousands of soldiers. And when they stopped, they lowered their wings into a silence as absolute as the noise had been thunderous moments before. This wasn't some machine producing sound through friction or wear. It was a sound that appeared exactly when there was motion and vanished completely the instant it stopped, as if the universe itself were responding to the will directing these creatures, with no energy wasted at all. Beside each creature stood a wheel on the ground, gleaming like chrysolite, a stone with a golden-green shine. But these weren't ordinary wheels. Each one had a wheel within a wheel, able to move in any direction without ever needing to turn, just like the creatures themselves. Later, Jewish commentators argued for centuries over exactly how to picture that wheel within a wheel structure, but they all agreed on one point. The design didn't follow the logic of any chariot known to ancient engineering. This wasn't a vehicle built to travel in a straight line and turn at corners. It was a structure built for absolute, unrestricted movement toward any point at all, with no need ever to reorient. And the rims of these wheels were covered in eyes all the way around, moving in perfect sync with the living creatures at every turn, because the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. These aren't decorative eyes. They're a functional part of the design, as if the capacity to see were distributed across the entire structure, driving home the central idea of the vision. In the presence of God's throne, there isn't a single point that remains blind to what's happening around it. Above the heads of these four creatures stretched an expanse that gleamed like crystal, awesome in its clarity. And above that expanse, a throne that looked like sapphire. And on the throne, a figure with the appearance of a man, surrounded by a glow the text compares to a rainbow appearing in the clouds on a rainy day. It's telling that Ezekiel, with all his priestly vocabulary, with all his training in the technical language of the temple, gets to this point and can only describe what he sees by approximation. Like, resembling, having the appearance of. The prophet isn't reaching for literary metaphor here. He's using the only tool available to someone confronting something no human vocabulary was ever built to name precisely. Ezekiel calls this the glory of the Lord, and his response, once he'd taken in the full vision, was to fall on his face. The only physical response possible for someone facing something that completely overwhelmed his experience as a priest trained in Jerusalem. These four-faced, four-winged creatures don't show up just once in the book of Ezekiel. In chapter 10, the text names them explicitly, using a word every Israelite would have recognized: cherubim. That name ties this vision to two of the most weighted moments in all of Scripture. The cherubim god, placed at the entrance to Eden with a flaming sword to guard the way to the tree of life, and the golden cherubim whose wings covered the mercy seat above the Ark of the Covenant, the place where God had promised to make his presence known among his people. The creature Ezekiel saw beside an irrigation canal in Babylon wasn't some new invention. It was the very same kind of being that had guarded the gate of Eden since the beginning of human history, the same figure the priests saw cast in gold on top of the ark. The cherub isn't a piece of heavenly decoration, it's the appointed guardian of God's throne and presence. This same family of creatures shows up again, centuries later, in the vision the Apostle John recorded in the book of Revelation, where he describes 4 living creatures around the throne, one like a lion, one like a calf, one with the face of a man, and one like an eagle, each with 6 wings and covered with eyes all around and within, endlessly singing a hymn of holiness. The parallel with the scene beside the Kebar River isn't a coincidence. Both describe at different points in the history of salvation the very same fundamental class of guardians surrounding the very same glory. What's remarkable is that between Ezekiel's vision by the Kebar Canal and John's vision on Patmos, more than 600 years pass, 2 different languages, 2 completely different historical settings, and yet the core pattern holds: 4 faces, multiplied eyes, absolute closeness to the throne. As if that particular form of guardianship were a fixed part of heavenly reality, not an image one author happened to imagine once. And that changes the emotional weight of what was happening beside the river Kebar. The Israelite exiles in Babylon were tormented by a question few of them probably dared say out loud. If God lived in the temple in Jerusalem, hundreds of miles away, did that mean they'd fallen outside the reach of his presence? The vision Ezekiel received answered that question in a way no sermon could have. The very same kind of creature that guarded God's throne in the Holy of Holies back in the temple was now present in the fullness of its glory, beside a canal in a foreign land. The throne had moved. God's presence wasn't locked inside 4 stone walls in Jerusalem. Consider the actual distance separating these exiles from home, from Jerusalem to the plains of Babylon, a journey that, under the guard of foreign soldiers, could take several months of forced marching through deserts and hostile territory. This wasn't an inconvenient move. It was a geographic and spiritual rupture so deep that by the religious thinking of the time, it amounted to falling outside the range of the one God they knew, a God they had come to associate almost exclusively with one stone building on one specific hill. Many of these exiles had grown up hearing that going up to the temple, standing before the altar, meant literally drawing near to the divine presence, as if that closeness depended on geography just as much as on faith. Losing the temple for them wasn't just losing an important building. As they understood the world, it meant losing their physical point of contact with God himself. It's worth pausing on the gap between what modern culture pictures when it hears the word cherub and what the text actually describes. Today, the word conjures up a sweet, decorative winged baby, the kind you'd find on greeting cards and Renaissance paintings. But what Ezekiel saw has nothing sweet about it. These are creatures with 4 faces that never once look away, with wings whose sound is compared to an army's roar, escorting a throne wrapped in fire, and a glow so overwhelming it drops a trained priest to the ground. The biblical text doesn't soften this image, it presents it in the full weight of its terror. It's almost ironic that, 2,500 years later, we've reduced these fire and multiplied eyes sentinels to a decorative plaster figurine on a shelf. And yet, within all that awe, there's something deeply comforting about the role these creatures play. They aren't there to attack or to inspire fear for its own sake. They're there to guard, to escort, to make sure the holiness of the throne stays intact and accessible only on the terms God himself sets. They're guardians, not executioners. The fear they inspire doesn't come from cruelty. It comes from the sheer scale of what they've been entrusted to protect. If the guardians of God's throne are built with no blind spots at all, able to see in all 4 directions without ever having to turn their backs, what does that tell you about the way God himself watches over what's happening in your life, even in the moments that feel most distant, most exiled, most out of his reach? I'd love to hear in the comments what image you had of an angel before coming across this passage, and whether this description changes anything about how you think about God's nearness. Because that's really the heart of everything this vision communicates. Ezekiel wasn't in the right place by the religious standards of his day. He was far from the temple, far from Jerusalem, far from everything his priestly training had taught him to consider sacred. And yet right there, beside an irrigation canal in a foreign land, the heavens opened and showed him that the throne of God was escorted by creatures capable of watching in every direction at once, never for a moment losing sight of anything happening around them. That throne wasn't confined to some ruined building, wasn't limited by political borders. It moved to wherever its people needed to see it, escorted by guardians who never had to turn around, because they were already watching every direction at once. There's something almost prophetic, too, in the fact that this vision arrived just a few years before the temple in Jerusalem was actually destroyed by the Babylonians. When that destruction came, the exiled Israelites already had this image to hold on to. The certainty that God's presence never depended on that stone building, soon to be reduced to rubble. Without fully realizing it in the moment, Ezekiel was receiving, ahead of time, exactly the comfort his people would need once word of Jerusalem's fall finally reached the banks of the Kebar canal. If you've ever felt like you're in the wrong place at the wrong time, too far from where you think God is at work, this vision by the river Kebar is Scripture's oldest and most powerful answer to that fear. The very same kind of creature that guarded the entrance to Eden and covered the Ark of the Covenant with its wings appeared to an exile with no temple, no city, nothing the world would call sacred anywhere around him, to show him that God's presence needs no buildings, no borders, to reach the one who's looking for it. If this story left you seeing the creatures guarding God's throne in a new light, subscribe so you don't miss the next reconstructions of the most astonishing visions recorded in Scripture, and share this video with someone who, like Ezekiel by the river Kebar, needs to be reminded today that no place is ever out of reach of God's gaze.